Wanderer of the Wasteland by Zane Grey, Chapter 20, Part 1. Adam's return to camp was as vague as one of his desert nightmares. But as thought gained something of ascendancy over agitation, he became aware of blood and dust and sweat caked with his clothes upon his person, proving the effect of his supreme exertions. He had heaved an endless number of rocks. He had heaved the mountainside down upon Veery, all to no avail. A higher power had claimed him, and the spirit of Magdalene Veery, like her living presence, had inscrutably come between Adam and revenge. When Adam had packed his burros, twilight in the clefts of the hills had deepened to purple. He filled his canteens and started the burros down toward the gateway. The place behind him was as silent as a grave, and Adam did not look back. He felt the gray obscurity close over the scene. Down at the gateway, he saw that the valley was still light with the afterglow of sunset. Diagonally and far across the ashen waste, he descried the little dark patch, which he knew to be an oasis, where the waters of Furnace Creek sank into the sands. The intense heat, the vast stillness, the strange radiation from the sand, the peculiar gray light of the valley, these told Adam that midnight furnace winds would blow long before he reached his destination. But he welcomed any physical ordeal. He saw how great strife with the elements, a strain to the utmost of his strength and his passion to fight, would save his faith, his hope, perhaps his mind. So gradual was the change from twilight to darkness that he would scarcely have noted it but for the dimming of the notched peak. Out there in the open valley it was not dark. It was really the color of moonlight on marble. Wan and opaque, mystic, it made distance false. The mountains seemed far away and the stars close, like the bottom of the Dead Sea drained of its bitter waters. Was this Death Valley? Action, strong and steady use of muscle, always had served to drive subjective broodings and wonderings and imaginings from Adam's mind, but not here. In this sink at night, he seemed continually and immensely confronted with the unreality of a fact. A live man alone on the salt, dead waste of Death Valley, measureless and unbreakable, was the solitude, the waste hole into which drained the bitter dregs of the desert. He plodded on, driving the burros ahead of him. Jenny was contrary. Every few steps she edged off a straight line, and the angle of her ears and head showed that she was watching her master. She did not want to cross the valley. Instinct taught her the wisdom of opposition. Many a burro had saved its master's life by stubborn refusal to travel the wrong way. Adam was patient, even kind, but he relentlessly drove her on in the direction he'd chosen. At length, the ashen level plain changed its hue and its surface. The salt crust became hummocky and a dirty gray. The color caused false steps on his part, and the burros groped at fault, weary and discouraged. Adam would mount a slow heave, only to find it a hollow crust that broke with his weight. Some months before, or was it years, when he had crossed the valley far below this line, the layer of salt crust had been softer and under it ran murky waters, heavy as vitriol. Dry now as sun-baked clay, it made travel more difficult, although less dangerous. Adam broke through once. It reminded him that Dismukes had said the floor of the Death Valley was 40 feet from hell. Not for a long while had he thought of Dismukes, yet this hazardous direction he was taking now appeared to be the outcome of a long-made plan to meet the old prospector. Long hours and slow miles passed behind him. When the burros broke through, Adam had a task for all his strength. Once he could not pull Jenny out of a pitfall without unpacking her. And the time came when he had the added task of leading the way and dragging the burros with ropes. The burros did not lead well on good ground, let alone over this scorched and burnt salt crust. The heat and the oppressiveness and the dense silence increased toward midnight, and then began a soft and steady movement of air down the valley. Adam felt a prickling of his skin and a drying of the sweat upon him. An immense and mournful moan breathed over the wasteland like that of a mighty soul in travail. Adam got out of the hummocky zone upon the dry, crisp, white level of salt, soda, borax, and alkali, where thin pale sheets of powder moved with the silken rustle of seeping and shifting sands. Most fortunate was the fact that the rising wind was at his back. He strode on again, driving the burros ahead, holding straight for the dim-notched peak. The rising wind changed the silence, the night, the stars, the valley. They all changed in some unearthly manner. It seemed to muster all together, to move all, to insulate even the loneliness and clothe them in transforming, drifting shrouds of white, formless bodies impelled by nameless domination. White winds and weird, wild phantasms, midnight furnace blasts of Death Valley, nature's equilibrium, nature's eternal and perfect balance of the elements. Shoo, too many adjectives. Out here in the open, the hollow roar that had swelled and lulled through the canyons was absent. An incessant moaning, now rising, now falling, attended the winds on their march down the valley. Other differences there were here, and it was in more intense heat, and the blowing of white shrouds into the opaque gloom, the sweeping of sheets of powdery dust along the level floor, the thick air that bore a taste of bitter salt, an odor of poison gas. These indeed seemed not phenomena of normal earth. The wind increased to a gale, and then suddenly it lulled and died, leaving the valley to a pale, silent deadness. And again it preceded by a mournful wail. It rose harder and fiercer till it was blowing 70 miles an hour. These winds were the blasts of fury. They held heated substance. The power behind them was the illimitable upper air, high as the sky and wide as the desert, relentlessly bearing down to drive away the day's torrid heat. The gales accelerated Adam's progress so that sometimes he was almost running. Often he was thrown to his knees, and when the midnight storm reached its height, the light of the stars failed. The outline of mountains faded in a white whirling chaos, dim and moaning and terrible. Adam felt as if blood and flesh were burning up, drying out, shriveling and cracking. He lost his direction and clung to the burros, knowing their instinct to be surer than his. In time, pain left him, when sense of physical contacts and motions began to fade, when his brain seemed to reel. The burros dragged him on, and lower he swayed. Oftener he plunged to his knees, plowing his big hands in the salt and lowering his face into the flying sheets of powder. He gasped and coughed and choked and fought to breathe through his smothering scarf, and at last, as he fell exhausted, blinded, almost asphyxiated, the hot gales died away. The change of air saved Adam from unconsciousness. He lay there gradually recovering until he gained feeling enough to know the burros were pulling on the rope which tied them and him together. They were squealing. They were trying to drag him, to warn him, to frighten him into the action that would save his life. And thus goaded, Adam essayed to get upon his feet, and the effort seemed interminable lifting of colossal weights and a climbing up dragging stairs of sand. But for the burros, he would have plunged in a circle. Then followed a black and horrible interval in which he seemed hauled across a pale shingle of naked earth, peopled with specters and wandering lost men, still alive but half dead, leashed to the spirits of the burros he had driven to their death. Uphill, always uphill, they pulled him, with his feet clogged by the clutching sand. A gray dawn broke, and his entrance into the light resembled climbing out of somber depths to the open world. Another drab wall of iron rock seemed to loom over him. The valley of the white shadows of death had been crossed. A green patch of mesquites and cottonwoods gleamed cool and dark out of the gray sands. The burros ran with bobbing packs straight to the water they had scented. Staggering on after them, Adam managed to remove their burdens, and that took the remnant of his strength. Yielding to a dead darkness of sense, he fell under the trees. End of chapter 20, part 1.